I'd like to welcome Dan Everett today, and we're thrilled that he can join Ecological Citizens as we share stories of his work spending many years with the Pirahã from the Amazon Brazilian rainforest. When I first listened to his book, as I've got here, Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes, I was initially captivated by how the title provokes us not to assume what is normal for one group of people necessarily translates to another culture. This insight is pertinent to the development of ecological citizens, whose perspectives would benefit from being grounded in an appreciation of cultural plurality as the diverse ways humans interpret and inhabit our environments. Indeed, if you are Pirahã, saying to each other, "Don't sleep, there are snakes," is equivalent to "good night, sleep tight" in the UK. And it's also essential survival advice in the Amazon, as shorter sleeps are necessary because of nocturnal dangers, as opposed to, say, getting 8 hours, as many of us joining the call might aspire to. Indeed, my grandmother would say, "Good night, don't let the bed bugs bite," even though, unlike her, bed bugs have not been an issue in my home. So it goes to show that even the most innocuous sounding of phrases contains multitudes of human experience and perspective. For those of us in contemporary UK contexts, attending such distinctions is a reminder that ecological citizenship remains a collective rather than individual attunement to how other cultures interpret and respond to their environments. This awareness helps us unsettle our taken for granted assumptions and practice non-colonial forms of listening. It's with this in mind that drew me to reflect on what ecological citizens means to me through a Pirahã way of seeing. And of course, I won't steal any of Dan's thunder through giving away many memorable examples in his book, but his work seems timely and relevant to give pause to inspect our relationship with nature, each other, and many things we hold to be universal truths. Perhaps we need to look longer, closer, without presumption than we usually do. And so, a little about Dan. Dan has authored more than 15 books in over 120 articles on linguistic theory, languages of the Amazon, cognitive science, language evolution, anthropology, and philosophy. He has taught in Unicamp in Brazil, University of Pittsburgh, University of Manchester in the UK, Illinois State University, and Bentley University, accumulating 47 years of experience as a university professor with no plans to retire. As I mentioned, he's best known for his research on the Pirahã people of the Brazilian Amazon and their language, but in recent years has conducted the bulk of his research on psychological topics. He's also working on a book of Amazonian stories told in the first person by Amazonians with the working title, How We Live and Die, Tales from the Amazon. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dan Everett and thank you for your presentation. We'll be taking questions in around half an hour, as mentioned, and please do put the Q&A in the tab at the bottom, and we'll let you know at the end. Thanks ever so much. Over to you, Dan.
Great. It's wonderful to be with everyone this morning, and I am looking forward, as I always do, to sharing something about this wonderful people that the Pirahã. Actually, they call themselves the Hiaiche, which means the straight ones. Pirahã is a corrupted form of another word, I think, from the Pirahã language, corrupted in the sense of mispronounced and entered the Portuguese language many years ago in Brazil, but it really doesn't mean anything to the Pirahã, although they know that outsiders call themselves the Pirahãs. In this first slide, you can see me sitting there with my guitar, and this hut. This picture is probably 40 years old. This house, built in Pirahã style, but larger than Pirahã, normal Pirahã house, is where I raised my children, who are all older now than most people watching this today. The Pirahã, as you can see, are inside the house. This was a community house. At times we had I counted once, 55 people sleeping in the house with us who had come from other parts of the river because they're semi-nomadic, the Pirahã. So you can see that people are relaxed and they're sitting around, and it's also, as the evening comes, I would usually go out and run. When we lived in this location, we had a long 700-meter long airstrip um, put in mainly by the labor of the Pirahãs who wanted us to stay there. And I would jog on that strip in the afternoon and then come back and make coffee for everyone. So I believe this photo was taken as they're all waiting for coffee. So Pirahã conceptualization of their environment. This is another picture of the house. You can see often sitting around talking to the men here. All of these guys are my old friends. I, at one time, could say that I knew every single Pirahã alive, all 350 of them or so. And it's probably 150 more than that now. I'm just not sure. I haven't had any recent numbers. But these people were my best friends. And the fellow sitting here with the dark shirt on, his name is Kohoibehe, and he was my language teacher for many years. So it just occurred to me as I was running through the slides this morning that some people are shocked because there's nudity. I'm sure none of you are shocked by nudity, but just in case you are, there's a little warning. In particular, the children don't wear clothes until they're past puberty, and they don't always even wear them then. So you're not going to see that much, but just in case I forget something. So this is a more recent photo of one of my visits to them about 10 years ago on a beach and talking to them about how things are going. My connection with them has been very strong and very friendly over the several decades. There were a couple of incidents when we first got there as we adjusted to who we were and my family living with them, but it rapidly turned into very close friendships from them to me and me to them. This is a typical Pirahã house. This is a winter house because it's away from the beach, which means it's a bit sturdier. So if that doesn't look terribly sturdy to you, it's much sturdier than their summer houses. And you can see it's made with all natural material. Everything that you see here, like the cloth, hammock, her dress, this is all brought in from the outside, usually through me, but occasionally from Brazilian river traders. They live on a reservation that I helped the Brazilian government to demarcate back in 1985. So their contact with river traders is very minimal now. And since I'm no longer there, their main source of contact is with the Brazilian Indian Agency. I should say that in the last 2 months, because of dams that have been built on the Madeira River, and I'll show you where that is relative to their river with the next slide or two. They've, according to the Indian agency, FUNAI, they have lost a lot of the fish from their river, so they're struggling now, from what I hear, to feed themselves, and the Brazilian Indian Agency is there to help them through this and is definitely not allowing anyone to go visit them, or only in rare cases can they go out to the outside world. My ex-wife, Karen, lives along the Trans-Amazon Highway, so they do occasionally go out to visit her, and she then occasionally sends me WhatsApp videos of them, and I communicate with them through that. So this is a typical Pirahã village. If you were traveling the river, you can see the canoe of people here. If you're traveling the river, you can miss this village. This is a summer village because it's so close to the water. The water here has risen about 75 feet above its dry season. It's the depth of the dry season. However, it's still not entirely rainy season because they're living so close to the water. Their relationship with nature is very close. In fact, they're not the only culture to do this, but one of the few that have been documented. They nurse a variety of mammals, women do. And so they do this when they've killed the mother of the mammal and they want to raise it to full growth. They started off, since it's used to nursing from its mother, it nurses from Pirahã women. And I've often pointed out that this produces an interesting effect for the children who are also nursing from the same breast. um, because they have the taste and smell of these other animals on their mother's breast from the time that they're infants. And this leads to, I believe, part of the reason why their relationship with animals is so much different and their understanding of them is so much greater. It's not the only reason. There are many reasons their understanding of animals is much greater than non-scientists in our culture. It's a typical young Pirahã couple with a baby. Uh, in my opinion, my subjective opinion, they're very beautiful people, but then I'm suspect because I've lived with them for so long. This couple is a pair of teenagers and their new baby. And this is how the Pirahã travel very often. Interestingly, they do not make this type of canoe. They have several of these kinds of canoes, but they don't make them. They trade for them, or they are given them, or they steal them. Stealing is not so easy now since boats don't go up there. Their own canoes wouldn't take more than two people maximum. Usually they only hold one person, and they're just made from tree bark. Literally, they just take the bark off of a tree and put a few support sticks to hold the bark apart and some mud at both ends, and there they have a canoe. So their native-made canoes wouldn't hold as many people. So this is like a busload of Pirahã, and you can see how low the canoe is in the water and how some people have to stand for the whole journey. And that is a very interesting phenomenon. It takes a lot of patience, and I've seen a lot of Westerners try to stand in these canoes, and I can tell you that it's not easy, but this is the type of balance and preparation they have for the life that they have. You can also look at them and see the physical conditioning of the men and the women. Their life, it requires a lot of physical exertion. They do not snack in the sense that we do. They don't have high carb or high sugar elements in their diet. So in a recent trip that I made with a dentist, we looked at inside the mouths of every living Pirahã that we could find, and we did not find a single cavity. So it just shows how diet can affect your health tremendously. They don't have any of the kinds of metabolic syndrome that we have, nor do they have cavities, the kinds of things that are caused by our not always healthy diets. And this, if you're traveling the river in summertime when there's no rain, this is how close they get to the water. They go right up to the water's edge. In fact, if you look at this log here that hangs out over the water, sometimes you can see evidence that men sleep right out over the water on a log, which means they can't really turn over. But they sleep lightly. If you don't have a shirt on or clothes on, it's kind of hard to sleep on a log, but they do it, and they don't mind. Because they don't have many clothes and they don't have shoes, their bodies are calloused and their skin is strong, and they are able to withstand thorns and heat and bugs much better than the average Westerner because of the toughness of their skin. And again, what I call a summer house. If you look very carefully, you'll see that the sticks that are used here to hold it up are much thinner than the ones for the stronger winter house that I showed earlier. This is a sleeping pad that they've made, and hammocks, again, hammocks come from the outside. They like them, but normally they don't use them. They just sleep on these sticks going across that make a platform. As the water rises, it will totally cover this house. They won't tear the house down. They'll just let the water cover it and wash it away, and they'll build a house further into the jungle of the same material. And of course, it's all biodegradable. It's all native to the area, so there's nothing that's going to pollute the river. I will say about the river that a lot of people don't like to drink river water because of giardia and all kinds of other possible sources of illness that are found in the untreated water. But in all my 30 plus years with the Pirahã, I have rarely treated the water. When I travel by my own motorboat along my only water supply is a cup I carry beside me, and I just drink out of the river as I go. and I've never gotten sick. So either that's luck, or as I think the water is very pure. You don't want to drink the water right by the bank because the river is also their bathroom. But usually. But I will say that the river is wide. It's in the rainy season, it gets over 300 yards, almost 300 meters wide in some spots. And it goes from about less than a meter deep to maybe 20 and sometimes much more than 20 meters deep in the rainy season. So it rises a tremendous amount. And this is during the day, this is basically what you see. People take turns sleeping or caring for their children. So all these children are just hanging out around the village, and there's an adult woman with them. In this case, it's their mother, but it is not always their mother. It could be a woman, just someone else they know in the village, which of course they know everyone. It doesn't have to be a woman. It could also be a man who stayed home. So the village provides free babysitting while people are out looking around and care. You can see the dog there on the left watching very carefully. That's fairly large for a Pirahã dog, and some of these homes have as many as 15 dogs. And that is because the dogs help them hunt. When a man hunts, it's usually with a bow and arrow. Well, it's always with a bow and arrow. And when he fishes, it's usually with a bow and arrow, but if they have hook and line, they'll use that. Women can also fish with hook and line, but women don't use bows and arrows. So when they go to hunt, they take all their dogs, and their dogs grab whatever it is they're hunting, and they kill it with a machete. If the dogs haven't already killed it, they slap the dogs off of the food, and they pick it up and bring it back to the village to cook up for the next meal. So as was mentioned, my book on the Pirahã was Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes, was featured on BBC Radio 4 back in 2008, which hard to believe that's already been almost 18 years ago. And this is a very interesting poisonous snake. It's called a parrot snake, and it's a viper, and it is very deadly. And I've almost been struck by one of those by carelessly placing my hand on a tree. The general rule of thumb is when you're hiking in the jungle, keep your hands folded across your chest and don't give in to the temptation to steady yourself by putting your hand out on a tree, because trees have lots of thorns in the jungle. Most trees do. There are thorns all over the place. But mainly, you want to watch out at your feet, above your head, and at your arm's length, you want to watch out for snakes. So that's a good warning. Don't sleep, there are snakes. I thought I would take just a minute to show this brief video. I'm not going to show much of the video. I'm just going to give you a sample of this Pirahã guy talking. So he's talking to me, and he's telling me that the boat that we've gone, this is when we were filming the documentary Grammar of Happiness. He's telling me that there are a lot more Pirahã upriver, and he's telling me where to find them. We're speaking Pirahã, and he trusts me completely. He wouldn't tell most people where the other Pirahãs are. I've known him since he was about 2 years old, and at one time he was always flirting with my oldest daughter, so almost like a part of the family. So where are the Pirahã? I'll give you two maps. Here's one. So if you take out all the country boundaries of South America, they are right in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. In Brazil, they're getting to the western portion of the Amazon rainforest. But this area that is the Amazon is actually bigger than Europe. So this is a very large area. Doesn't surprise anybody to learn that the Amazon is a huge forest. And if we look deeper within this square. Here's a magnification of the square. So the Maisi River is here, and the Madeira River is here, and Humaitá is here. And then over here is Porto Velho. So I have gone in my own motorboat by myself from Porto Velho all the way to the Pirahã village, and that is about 400 miles. And it's quite a trip. It takes more than a day, so I wind up camping on beaches as I travel towards the village. Here's another map to show you, in case you didn't know that Brazil's in South America. This makes it sound amazing that somebody might not know that, but I had a family doctor ask me recently where Brazil is, what part of Africa Brazil is in. So, of course, that's an American question. So, no proper citizen of the UK would ask such a silly question. But anyway, just in case you didn't know that Brazil was in South America. About 2 centuries ago, the population was estimated at 50,000, and today they're at most about 350. Most only speak Pirahã and shun the trappings of the modern world. The greatest genocide in world history, as far as we can tell, is that of the American Indians, and by America I mean all the Western Hemisphere, not just North America or the United States or Central America, but North, Central, and South America. So the population was about 95 to perhaps 98% of the indigenous population of the Americas was destroyed by contact with Europeans. Just to give a feel for why Pirahã has been such a controversial language, my analysis of it has been controversial. I don't think it's a controversy that the Pirahã language exists. But about 20 years ago, actually 21, almost 22 years ago now, Noam Chomsky, Mark Hauser, and Tecumseh Fitch published a paper that argued that the single building block of human language is recursion. And then I found out, as I had just finished an article on why the Pirahã do not have recursion, somebody told me about the Chomsky article that I had missed somehow. So I brought that into the discussion, and it has been over 20 years of controversy. Although more and more people have looked at it, and many experiments have been done on this. I've taken researchers from MIT, Columbia University, Stanford University, University of Miami, the University of Campinas in Brazil, University of Amsterdam, have gone with me to the Pirahã to conduct experiments on my claims, UCLA, and none of them has, the weak claim is none of them has found any evidence against my analysis, and most of them have agreed with the analysis, and nobody has disagreed with it. Some have said some more evidence might be worthwhile. Well, of course, that's always the case, so I certainly don't deny that. However, in recent years, Jeffrey Pullum 2025, who's at the University of Edinburgh, has done a detailed study of my claims, looking at the data and looking at a number of other languages, and he has claimed that other languages are very much like Pirahã in this respect. So the main claim is that Pirahã is a language of a finite cardinality, which simply means that the number of sentences in the language is not infinite, as has been claimed by Chomsky, for example, that the number of sentences in any language is potentially infinite. But this is a claim that has been abused in many ways. And also, this has led me to the view that the standard tools of linguistic theory that I was raised on as a linguist are inadequate to deal with some of the variety in the world's languages, and that what we need is a better theory of linguistic inference to be able to infer structures. And this is the subject of all my recent work and ongoing work. I can return to that in the questions if people want to ask technical questions about Pirahã grammar. I'm happy to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about it much now because I've written so much on it and published so much on it. And I'm almost tired of talking about recursion. But there are other unique aspects of Pirahã culture that I've documented. They have no numbers. They have no color words. So how do you have a culture without numbers? This was the subject of many experiments, and we've shown that they don't even have the number one. They have small amount, slightly larger amount, and a much larger amount, and that's it. But no specific numbers. The same two fish could be described as one or many, not one, but a few or many, depending on the context. So if somebody comes in with two little fish, they will say, "Oh, that's a small amount of fish." But if you come in with two large fish, they might say, "Oh, that's a larger amount of fish, a large amount of fish." Um, so they have these words that describe comparative amounts, but they don't have precise number words. They also don't have precise color words. They see color, obviously. One of the common myths about the relationship between language and cognition is that if you lack a word for something, you can't think about it. That is false. It's well known that that's false among linguists, but somehow when I said that the Pirahã don't have words for the past or the future, or parts of words for past and future, this was taken by non-linguists to mean that I was saying that they didn't have a concept of past or future. This is not true. Every Pirahã knows they lived yesterday and that they likely will be alive tomorrow. Even though they don't have a word for yesterday and tomorrow, they have a word just for other day. And this is why context is so important. In a society like the Pirahãs, where everybody knows everybody and everything about everybody, and at one point or another, probably every adult has had sex with every other adult in the society, which leads to a different concept of the intimacy of society. They are able to infer a lot of the things that we have to talk about explicitly because we live in a society of strangers. We walk out of our door and we see many people we don't know every day. Most of the people I see every day, I don't know. Whereas among the Pirahã, I would never see anybody that I don't know unless somebody came from outside. So they don't have color words, but they have descriptions like that looks like blood, or that looks like water, or that looks like the sky, or that looks like a tree. In other words, green, blue, red. They tell me that my skin they can see through, which is another way of talking about white. And they say that their skin is opaque, which is another another way of talking about black. And I should also say that to have such white skin as I have is for them, it was initially a sign that I wasn't human, that I didn't have any blood. They make a big distinction between creatures with blood and creatures without blood, which are entities they propose for unexplained things they see in the jungle. But they've seen me bleed. I've cut myself on more than one occasion. I'm rather clumsy. So now that they know that I bleed, they know that their theory that white people don't have blood is not quite correct. Anyway, they don't have precise color words. They don't have myths, so they don't tell stories like Hercules, the labors of Hercules. They don't tell stories about God. They don't have any concept of God, actually. Religion is not part of their culture. This is another controversial claim. For some reason, many people want to believe that, or seem to take comfort in the idea that there are concepts common to all humans. But this is really not based on science unless you've done a study of all humans and found that they all have that concept. So there's no myths, there's no religion. John Lennon's song Imagine relatively well describes Pirahã culture, and they do have a lot to live for, so that part of his lyrics are wrong, nothing to live for. But to die for, they will risk their lives for their children, they will risk their lives for each other, but they wouldn't ever risk their lives for some cause in the way that we understand it. So they have the simplest kinship system known. There's my generation, Ahage, no gender distinctions. So everybody in my generation is a Haigi, whether they're my biological brother, my biological sister, or a man or a woman of my age in the village. The generation below me is Chiobahai, child. The generation above me is big, just called big. Um, and that exhausts their whole kinship system except for biological daughter and biological son, which is the only gender-based distinction that they make. Um, they also have a word for parent, which is gender neutral. So they don't really have a word for mother or father, but they have a word that is uh, common to both. And interestingly enough, it's mãe, which sounds like mãe in Portuguese, but it's actually not related to that. They prefer not to talk about the distant past or future, and my view of that is because they're empiricists. We have a state in the United States, Missouri, which its nickname is the Show Me State, where it's supposedly nobody believes anything unless you show it to them. Well, that's sort of like the Pirahã. They believe in things if they've seen it themselves, or someone who did see it told them about it, and they trust that person. But they're not going to believe stories about things that nobody's witnessed who's alive today. I mean, they don't say it's false, but it's not of much relevance to them, so they don't talk about that kind of thing. Which makes it very difficult for a Christian missionary, as I was when I first went there, to tell them about Jesus when I've never seen Jesus, and nobody I know's ever seen Jesus. They find it implausible to follow it. They're polite to listen, but they've also told me they don't want to hear any more about this. They're done hearing about that. And I'm also done hearing about that since they converted me, in a sense, to their own non-religious view, non-supernatural, I would say, superstitious view. Death is part of life. They do not fear death. They see it all the time. They're not buffered from it like we are. If somebody dies in our society, you might see the body if they fall dead in front of you, but after that, you won't see the body again unless you want to have an open casket funeral. So they see people die. I asked them what happens to you after you die, and they pointed to a dead animal at the water's edge, and they said, "That's what happens to you. What's the mystery?" They're not superstitious, although they don't draw a hard and fast line the way we would between fact and fiction. They interpret most things as facts. So if they see creatures or they hallucinate or they dream, they talk about that like it's a fact. And it was a factual experience. If your dreams are facts in the sense that you had that dream. The only concept of sin that I've been able to discover among the Pirahã, and sin is really not the right word at all, it's a word we might use, is anger. The worst thing you can do is to show anger. Violence is a form of anger. So to be violent is to be a dangerous creature, and it could get retribution. But in general, you don't raise your voice. You don't yell at people. You certainly would never strike anyone else. I put this diagram in here because there are two sounds in Pirahã, in this one in particular in the diagram, that's not found in any other language of the world, where the tip of the tongue, hits the roof of the mouth and then hits the teeth and then comes out. And that sound is le. And so we find it in words like ibr, which is the word for milk. Br is the sound of their language, and le is the sound of their language. So ibr. But it can also be whistled as, because it's high, low, low. They have 3 vowels and 7 consonants if you're a woman, 8 consonants if you're a man. And they have tones, 2 tones, high and low. And every vowel has a tone. So if you forget the tones, you get things like che, which means excrement, or che, which means myself, or kahai iwe, which means knife, and kahai iwe, which means arrow, or uh, uh, and so they have a lot of words like that. That if you can't hear the tones, you don't know the words. So the Pirahãs have constructed a hunter-gatherer culture that frowns on theoretical speculation, and frowns on strain from strong empirical support. What do hunter-gatherers do for a living? It takes about 15 to 20 hours in a normal day. The days aren't normal now because of the dams that have been built. But usually it takes about 15 to 20 hours a week to find enough food to feed your family. And the rest of the time is largely spent in doing whatever you want to do in leisure. Their diet is probably 70% fish and 20% game, and or maybe I should say 15% game, and the rest would be plants that they find in the jungle. At this time of year, the Brazil nuts are starting to fall, so they will literally have tons of Brazil nuts in their jungle, and that's a very great source of protein. So they can have a lot of those stockpiled to eat. They believe in each other. They believe in the need to take care of each other. They believe that we need food, and they believe that they know how to get it. But they don't have beliefs that go beyond experience. They have no religion whatsoever, no superstitions, nobody that has authority, no spiritual entity that has authority over them, or that they seek counsel from, or they don't pray, they don't do that. And they don't coerce one another, which goes along with no anger. So when I give these rules like no anger and no coercion, that doesn't mean it never occurs. It means that when it does occur, it's a violation of the norms, and the norms aren't violated that often. It's like in the United States, we have a rule against theft, but a lot of theft takes place. I'd like to think that it's the small minority of people that steal things, but it turns out that most people have stolen something at some point in their life. But I wouldn't classify them as thieves if they've been sorry about it and done something about it. Okay, so the universe is a really interesting concept for the Pirahã. So when I pointed up to the sky when I was first in there and asked them what you call that, they said Miggy. So I wrote that down, Miggy. And then I pointed to the ground. I said, "What do you call that?" And they said Miggy. And I thought, I must not be hearing a tone. There's something I'm not hearing here. And then eventually I realized they are the same word. So, and if to say the ground is wet is Miggy ihoi, and to say the sky is cloudy is Miggy ihoi. So what does that mean? Miggy refers to the boundaries of our experience. The sky is one of our boundaries, and the ground is another of our boundaries. And in between is the living space, the biosphere, the oe. So the oe refers to the jungle, but it also refers to everything in life. So if you want to tell someone to be still, you say, do not move into the jungle. And that doesn't just mean don't go into the jungle. It means freeze in position. Stay right there right now, because it literally means don't disturb the environment. Don't move into the environment. And this is a pretty typical shot of the Pirahã environment. It looks beautiful because it is beautiful. And I've been in a lot of places in the world, but there's nothing like the Amazon. The water is very important to the Pirahãs. They live on the water. There's no separate word for river or rain or most lakes. There is a word for an oxbow lake, which is a formation off the river called Abroi. And they have heard of salt water because they asked me once if I had seen it. And I suspect they heard about that from one of the Pirahãs who spoke a little bit of Portuguese and talked to a river trader. But this is a typical scene when you travel with the Pirahãs during the day. What do they eat? One of the things they like, but they don't have in their river anymore, is this pirarucu. Brazilian, that's a Tupi word for it. It's found in other South American countries. It's the biggest freshwater fish in the world. As you can see, this guy is struggling to bring it out of the water. They can get up to 400 pounds. This is, catfish, which are found throughout the river, a woolly monkey, And the favorite animal, the biggest animal of the rainforest is the tapir. That'll be about 1,500 pounds, a very large adult tapir, and it's a lot of red meat. So they only get these in the dry season, but they love it when they get them because the three ingredients that are so bad for our health, fat, sugar, and salt, are three of the things they most want because, after all, our bodies have to have fat, sugar, and salt, but they don't have access to it all the time. They don't have to worry about over-consuming salt or over-consuming fat or over-consuming sugar. So when they kill an animal that is quite fat, like a tapir, they're very happy. Um, and Salt is added salt is a very rare thing. When they kill an animal and eat it, it has salt in it already. But So this is just one part of their food, just a little sample of the kinds of things they eat. And I have eaten all of these things with them, of course. Um, when it comes to ecology, it's food first, ecology second. So this photo, which is the cover of the Japanese edition of Don't Sleep, shows these three men, or two men, chopping down a valuable tree. This white sap means it's either a sorva tree, which is where we get chewing gum, or where we used to get chewing gum, and also, or a rubber tree. This is actually not a rubber tree. I went out there with them. But they're chopping this down because they saw a large beehive at the top of this very tall tree, and it's much less dangerous to chop the tree down than to climb up there. And why do they care about the beehive? Because it's going to be full of honey, and that is a food that is very desirable for them. So they use the bow and arrow. This is what they hunt with. You can see that the arrows are very long, and the bow is very hard to pull back. It's a very strong bow. The string is made from bark, and women make the string. The man makes the bow, uh, and the man gets the arrow shaft, and the man gets the arrow tip, and the man collects the feathers, but the woman sews them all on, adds them with cotton that she spins from trees in the area. Um, she sews everything together. She puts it all together. So to have a weapon, to have a basis for making your living in the jungle, there has to be a man and a woman cooperating. If a man is not married, that's going to be difficult, although he could probably get his mother or sister to do that for him. But they wouldn't do it regularly because it's supposed to be the sign of marriage. That's what it actually symbolizes, is the partnership between men and women. This is a typical summer day. You might say they're having a festive gala here on the beach as they all collect with plenty of food that they've gotten from the river. Just imagine this river is over 300 kilometers long. They're the only ones that live on it, and it used to be full of fish. And so life is very good for them in the summertime, as the old Gershwin song makes it clear for the U.S. South, too. So the Pirahã know how to live in the world. They know everything. If you ask them about a plant or an animal, they can give you an encyclopedic list of its characteristics. They can tell you what kind of food every animal eats. They can tell you how to catch them. I've had Pirahã almost bitten by a poisonous snake come into the village and say, I don't have time today, but tomorrow morning I'm going to go kill that snake. And it's very interesting to know that they understand snake behavior well enough to know where that snake is hiding. And the guy went out, and about 45 minutes later, he came in with a very long, poisonous snake with an arrow through its head and stuck it up on a tree for people to see. Um, so they enjoy its beauty. Once I walked to the river's edge and I saw a guy sitting there looking at the water, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he used this little phrase, "waga," little word, which just means contrary to expectations. That's what that word means. It's like but or however or something. But he said, contrary to expectations, I'm just looking at it. It's very pretty. So they love the environment. They live in nature without buffers. They preserve what they have. They take care of one another. They don't want outsiders coming in because they have seen that outsiders don't respect nature like they do. So I'm going to stop here and see if there are questions, and I'm going to turn off my sharing of the slide.
Thank you so much, Dan. Yes, there's certainly been questions racking up, but I didn't want to break the flow. It's terrific. There was one question that I just thought might be appropriate to bring to the top, given the context, which is that is there any connection or stories related to Mother Earth, in quotes, or Gaia? And I guess if I may just add one of my own just to that, of, many people will be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the sense of self being the pinnacle. Do you think these things are anathema, or what was the discussion when you broached these subjects?
Well, the hierarchy of needs is, one could say it applies there. When a man goes out to fish, if he catches fish, which he always will in a normal time, he will eat first out by himself in the middle of nowhere. He will feed himself. Then he will come back and he will feed his family. And whatever's left over goes to the village, with the caveat that everyone who takes his fish is supposed to give him back in kind that amount of fish. They don't have a concept of Mother Earth, and they don't have a concept of Earth. They're just their environment, their biosphere, their jungle. And they do know that there are other jungles, so they do have that awareness. And they know that I come from a totally different place, for example. And it sounds completely unattractive to them when I tell them how cold it gets. And they just find it bizarre that anybody would want to live in the Northern Hemisphere. Um, but um, they take care of themselves, which requires a consciousness of their local environment and care for that.
So that's great. And I think a nice follow on from that might be a question from Luke of how did living with the Pirahã reshape your understanding of how a community's relationship with the natural world can shape its language, values, and daily decision making?
Well, it influenced me tremendously, which is why I've written several books about that. But I think that as you sit there and watch them, you don't see waste. Um, you don't see overconsumption. Consumption's not a value per se. I mean, if they have food, they will eat it until it's gone. But then they may not go out again the next day to hunt because they want to hang around with their kids. And I've seen a lot of men, they eat a lot one day, and the next day, or maybe even 2 days, they just hang out with the family. Um, you'll never see an overweight Pirahã, except when you take them out to town because they're hunters and gatherers. So they will eat everything in sight. They just have this voracious appetite when they're out because they want to go back in fat to show people uh, that they've accumulated all this wealth. So I've had guys gain like 25, 30 pounds when they were out for medical treatment, but within a couple of months, it's all gone. Um, nobody stays that way because their way of life, constant physical activity, and always eating what you need and no more, and having no desserts, no snacks, not a lot of starches. Their diet is extremely healthy, and uh, the, their drink most of the time is 99.999% is water. That's it. Water straight from their river, which is, I've said, is unpolluted. So it's a very healthy life. Although without medical treatment, there is malaria. Most of the diseases they get, however, are brought in from the outside, which is why they don't like to see outsiders come in.
I think actually that would be a lovely point, just mentioning the outsiders thing. Really great question from admittedly anonymous of what responsibilities does a researcher have when their work brings global attention to a small, vulnerable community like the Pirahã?
Well, it's a tremendous, responsibility, I guess, intellectually, but the Brazilian government, because of the fame, because of all the notoriety, especially in Brazil, where, I've been on talk shows and I've done all kinds of work in Brazil. Um, the Brazilian government has taken its role in policing the borders of this reservation very carefully, so no one's allowed in. So I've had people, unless they enter illegally, and there happens to be no one there from the government at that time. Um, so I've had documentary filmmakers say, or photographers, let's go to the Pirahã, I'll pay all your way. And I say, well, the authorization process, even for me, is very long and arduous now. It didn't used to be. When I first got there, you could just come and go as you pleased, but it's very difficult now. And so when you get the authorization from the Brazilian government, come back to me about it. However, that authorization, the Brazilian government will not authorize unless somebody asks the Pirahã and they say it's okay. And the tricky thing there is I'm the only one who speaks the language. So it's very difficult to get authorization. I should say my ex-wife also speaks the language. She speaks it very well, in fact, and she lives on the outskirts. But she would never do anything to facilitate a stranger going into the Pirahã. She's very opposed to that because of what we've seen over the years.
And I guess maybe that leads on just to another question about essentially how do the Pirahã define boundaries of their social world, and how does that differ from Western ideals of identity and belonging? And I guess if I may, I remember you having a discussion with me about TVs being introduced, and I won't steal your thunder, but that might be an interesting thing to frame some of those points.
Yeah, when they first saw television, the first person who ever saw television, as far as I know, among the Pirahãs, uh, was with me out in the city to get medical treatment, and we're sitting in a doctor's waiting room, and there's a television, and I have to go with him, obviously, because I have to interpret everything. I also have to buy him Brazilian clothes because doctors' waiting rooms probably don't want a naked hunter-gatherer sitting in the waiting room. So, and he couldn't make out anything on the TV because, and we've done a lot of experiments to show this, um, at least many years ago, recognizing two-dimensional images was very hard for them because they see everything in 3D. Um, but eventually they were able to start recognizing pictures and television. And so now the Brazilian government, for a period, had televisions in the village with a satellite dish antenna, which they need about as much as I need another donut. Um, Being sarcastic, but they don't need it at all. Um, but they would sit around and watch it, and the government would then provide them with food, rice, which is probably what they're getting now. Well, rice is better than going hungry, but also rice, you start to see Pirahã gain weight, and you start to see them actually develop cavities. Because in addition to rice, they introduced sugar cane, the Brazilian government did. Everybody thinks sugar cane is a good thing, but it's horrible. It introduces cavities, and especially because you have to chew on it and get that sugar embedded in your enamel, it's going to cause cavities, and they never had cavities. Um, so they don't, they consider themselves the straight ones, and we are all crooked ones. So they're quite ethnocentric. It's not like they feel inferior to us. They feel quite superior to everyone else. They certainly feel superior to me because I can't do anything in the jungle very well. I've had people think I must be some great outdoors person. Well, I can live in the jungle because I can be tough enough to withstand it. But I don't. I'm not. I would be. I'm a good outdoorsman because I can withstand it, not because I've got all kinds of clever solutions. Um, and so they consider me to be a dependent when I'm in there. And the thing that makes it worth it is my medical help. And I do take in, when somebody's working with me on the language, I give them food for their family. That's sort of the payment. I feed their family for however long they're working with me. And that's not the total payment, but that's certainly an expected part of working with me. They're not going to miss a day fishing to teach me about verbs in the language. Um, but if they do teach me about verbs in the language, I provide their family with meat and whatever else they would expect to eat.
I'm going to try and combine two questions as I think they're relevant. So, firstly, from Andrew, love the use of the word attunement. It would be great to hear some practices that might help us further attune in our Western paradigms. And secondly, what lessons do you think Western societies could take from Pirahã about unconscious habits through our language, beliefs, and daily routines that shape how we see the world without even realizing it?
Well, I mean, these are broad philosophical questions. And if you describe the Pirahã, you can describe them in fairly straightforward terms as being focused on the here and now, not worrying about tomorrow. I mean, actually, nothing's going to be different tomorrow, right? Tomorrow's going to be the same as today, and yesterday was the same as today. So I don't have any ambitions. So I'm not worried about whether I'm going to get this job or that job. I don't need a job. I don't need any of this stuff. Um, so if my child gets sick, I worry about that. But um, there's plenty of opportunity to worry about what's going on right now. I don't need to worry about what's going to happen or what might happen. So they're totally unconcerned about the possibility of nuclear war. Maybe they would be some of the few people to understand it. So they're attuned with their environment in a very local way. They don't generalize. They don't talk about the planet or all the jungles that people live in. You got yours to manage, we have ours to manage, they've got theirs to manage, and we each manage our own. So they don't see um, this interconnectedness that's so often theorized. They have had dramatic changes in their environment, but this is not because of global warming. The water has been getting higher and lower, so their seasons have become more extreme, totally apart from anything else. So that is a sign of global warming, I take it. Although I haven't done any serious studies of statistics going back into the past. And however, the recent decision by the Brazilian government to build a series of dams starting near the Bolivian border on the Madeira River and coming into Brazil. They've got several large dams and a couple of smaller dams, and that has thrown off the water flow of the river so dramatically. So their river is a tributary of the Madeira. So whatever happens to the Madeira, if the Madeira rises too much, they're going to see it in their river. If the Madeira falls too low and their river falls too low, they're going to see it. And one of the ways they see it is the migration of fish out of the river. So they went from having, if you have a brown water river in the Amazon, that's much richer in minerals. So it's also going to be much richer in animal life. So the Pirahã live on a very dark water, black water, or tea-colored water. And that means it's going to have a lot of the same life of the Madeira, but it's going to have less of it. And if you're only 350 people living on a river that's over 350 kilometers long, you're going to have plenty of food. But if that alters, if the cycle alters, which it has recently, that could lead to great hunger. So they went out recently and they killed an animal for food that was on a farm, but they actually consider that farm on their land. Nobody ever consulted them about the reservation. I wanted to give them more land, and the Brazilian government said, 350,000 hectares is enough. But for them, it's not enough because they've used a lot more. So they've considered that farm on their land. They killed an animal, and 3 young men from the farm got shotguns and took off after them. Well, I wouldn't advise that because they know the jungle. And so all 3 were shot with arrows. One was killed, an arrow right through his head. That's a pretty hard shot for a wooden tipped arrow to go from one end of your skull to the other, come out the other end. And I saw the body actually. And the others were put in the hospital. So people think of the Pirahã as these wild, dangerous, violent people, but that's just far from the truth. They're very gentle people, but if you want to invade their land, then they're not so gentle.
Mm. Honestly, Dan, this has been terrific. And I'm just going to try and take 2 last questions and then I know we have to wrap up. So firstly, it would be remiss of me, as I alluded to it earlier, that essentially could you speak a little bit about some of your use of technology and large language models, which are currently in vogue, but you were working with them very early on. And that's a nice segue to lead into that, in the global context of where space and communities like the Pirahã are increasingly threatened, what do you hope your legacy of your work to be?
Well, my concern with, say, large language models, I just spoke to a group at Google working on these problems last week, um, is mainly with the philosophy of inference and how we infer one thing from another, which, of course, is the whole technology behind large language models. And so I'm working on the theory of inference that was first developed by Charles Sanders Peirce about 150 years ago. And Peirce was, at the time, he's the first one to design a workable model of an electronic computer. Was at the time that he was alive, he was the United States' greatest mathematician. He was its greatest geophysicist, and he was the founder of pragmatism, the philosophy, and the founder of semiotics, which later a diluted version of that came out from Ferdinand de Saussure, who had, I believe, seen Peirce's notes. And so how do we have different kinds of grammars? We have different kinds of grammars because the simpler your grammar, the fewer the cues you have for what the meaning is. And you have to infer more of it from context. So English has a complex syntax. That means there's lots of cues built into English, such as recursion, that help us know how to interpret the sentence. And in a society of strangers, that interpretational aid is quite useful. In a society like the Pirahãs, you have everyone understands the context in sort of the same way, so a lot of inference is possible. So it's not a surprise that they have a simpler grammar. Not all hunter-gatherers have simpler grammars by any means. So this only goes in one direction. Basically, you don't need a complex grammar when the context is understood. Can you have one? Sure, you can have one, but you don't need one. You don't need you need more than a simple grammar in a more complex society, although Mandarin shows that it doesn't have to match English in the way that it's constructed. Um, so there are many lessons to draw from the Pirahã as we think about inference and the fact that the original grammatical theory that was so influential in the world doesn't apply to Pirahã, and now it turns out a lot of other languages in the research of Jeffrey Pullum. Um, so we need something else. We need something beyond this. And LLMs already provide that. So we've already seen that large language models can learn English syntax. This was supposed to be impossible. 50 years ago, it was claimed to be impossible that any statistical program could learn a modern language. But in fact, they do. And even some of my ideas on inference that come from Peirce's philosophy don't necessarily follow when we look at the dramatic success of some of these large language models. I mean, just the fact that you can predict in a row of words, one word can predict more or less the next one, which can predict them. I mean, that sounds so simple, like a Turing machine, but it is able to do just about anything. So I think my chosen profession of linguistics, um, there's a lot of it that's still valid, very important. Phonetics, how the physical properties of sounds and how people make sounds and how people perceive sounds. But the generation of syntactic structures and the interpretation of syntactic structures seem to be beyond the realm of linguistics. And so, for example, just to give one example, if I say, John said that Mary is pregnant, that can't be more than a time period of 9 months. If I say last year John said Mary is pregnant, that sounds weird. If I said 12 months ago John said Mary is pregnant, nobody takes that. But if I say 12 months ago John said the elephant is pregnant, that's not a problem because elephants are pregnant for more than 12 months. So real world knowledge tells us how to interpret our sentence. This is just part of inference, and this hasn't been addressed all that well in standard linguistic theory.
Gosh, Dan, I wish there was more time, but you know how these things go and the questions are piling up. So I can only just encourage people to, this is the only time I'd say don't read the book, actually listen to the audiobook, because it's wonderful hearing your, basically speaking in the native tongue. And also, of course, your email, deverett@bentley.edu was on the first slide. If there's any questions, we apologetically didn't manage to have time for today, but I can only thank you sincerely, Dan. It's a fascinating tour de force of a very different experience for many people here.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure to be here. And if anybody wants to write me, they can feel free to do that.
It's a pleasure.